I can say for myself, like, I know what it's like to have fragmented focus. I know what it's like to be overwhelmed. I know what it's like to have various forms of ADHD or traumatic responses to things.
Thoughts, that thoughts are bringing feelings, feelings are bringing actions, and that thing brings results. What do you think about that, Shae? And Mo, if you want.
Honestly, there's a secret that people need to wake up to, which is that our nervous systems are programmed at a young age, and our negativity biases are often set at those younger ages.
If you're enjoying the content, go ahead and click the like button because we like to know that the content brings value to you.
If you want more tips, stories, and real talks like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification button. That way, we will always be the first who will know that a new episode just dropped.
We really appreciate you being here. Let's keep learning and growing together.
Hello, everyone. It's a beautiful day to be alive. Yet again, we're back with Make Tech Work, a beautiful episode with a new guest, Mr. Shae Matthews. How are we doing, Mr. Shae?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here. I can't wait to see what comes out in this conversation.
Absolutely. Before we get started, Steve, how are we doing, my brother?
Very good. But I lost my voice over the weekend, so I will let you lead the thing, Mo, but I'll be listening and asking a few questions.
I got your back. I got your back, Steve. Before we get going, I just want to introduce, perhaps, you're very welcome, Steve. I want to introduce Shae quickly, just a quick introduction. So Shae brings to the table over 15 years of experience as an international coach and global nomad. Shae has been part of the digital nomad lifestyle for the last 10 years. Over his career as a life coach and mentor, Shae brings to the table thousands of hours of high-performing coaching sessions where he helps young high performers solve problems and focus on self-development and create a beautiful experience where he mainly combines psychology and ancient wisdom. Shae, did I miss anything, my brother?
It's the perfect introduction. Thank you so much.
So, Shae, I just have a quick question for you, if possible. So tell us a little bit about perhaps inner game coaching, and currently what are some of the main techniques that you are following to help high performers stay within that focused level?
Absolutely. Well, I guess there's the kind of the short story and the long story. So I'll tell you a little bit of background because I think it could be interesting for the listeners to have a bit of context, and then we'll get into the details. But I'll try and keep it somewhere in between the short and the long. So the first thing is that the concept of inner game is really something that started really back in the early days of coaching. So if we follow the logic or the development of coaching back in the 70s, there wasn't really much going on in terms of, let's say, performance psychology or transformational work. Like these days, we live in a world where we have a constant access to so many wonderful different inputs from different media sources. But back then, the idea of psychology was more or less just stuck in the traditional types of like Freudian psychoanalysis, etc. And there was a guy named Tim Galloway who was responsible for the first inner game book, which was the inner game of tennis. And ultimately, he was a guy who was interested in sports and sports performance. And what he started to realize was that, using the power of imagination and vision, using the power of intention was actually something that would improve people's performance. And back in the 70s, that was a pretty revolutionary idea in the mainstream sense. So in a game of tennis then started to become a little bit of a cult classic. That was actually the spawning point of a lot of performance sports coaching. But then that concept of performance coaching then started to bleed over into other areas like business coaching and performance coaching. Then you had the inner game of business, also by Tim Galloway, for example. So that became like a kind of a philosophy. So that's a little bit about like the origination of the concept of like inner game. And then in time, that sort of evolved into a lot of different forms. And without going into too much detail, there was a lot of evolutions of coaching, beginning with things like neuro-linguistic programming, which some people might be familiar with, which is a very amazing tool, which is one of the tools that I like to use, which is understanding, people's nervous system, neurological, linguistics, which is language, similar to as we like to talk about in tech. It's like we're using languages, programming languages, systems, and, the actual programming part, which is how we put all that together. So nervous system, language, and system. So that's the basis of what early stages of coaching were all about. Now, I came into the scene in probably the early 2000s, I started to come across like NLP because I was told by some mentors and friends, like, you should check this stuff out. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And so it tapped me into the most basic things. And just to give you a quick bit of background, I was originating from bodywork. I studied Eastern health therapy and systems thinking and acupuncture and Tai Chi and Taoism and Buddhism. And, I used to be into kind of various forms of holistic embodiment techniques. So all that together then started to create a philosophy that I was working with. And then I got involved with like the transformational work with particularly men. And obviously, because I was working with men often in the lifestyle design and dating niche, I got a lot of engineers and analytical guys and CEOs
Wow.
and people that were very much related to, wanting to do highly analytical introverted jobs because, they also needed to counterbalance that with more like soft skills and external skills. So long story in between, I could say a lot of things in terms of like what started to happen through that process. So I started out as NLP and doing like various forms of body work. And then that started to open up a rabbit hole where I started to look into a lot of esoteric sort of systems, including things like, the sort of Western magical systems of how we create our realities with our intentions. And then also that started to then evolve into more communication tools. And then I went down a lot of paths of shamanism, and then integrated that also back into sort of modern lifestyle design and ways in which we understand the nervous system.
Hmm.
So that then evolved into what I would call like energetic psychology, which is another field these days. So all that wrapped up into what I do these days, which is my transformational inner game style. And ultimately, what I tend to do more than anything now is I work with people's mentality and psychology first. I do a series of assessments to see what's useful for them in terms of schema therapy. So that's another thing. It's a sort of cognitive behavioral therapy. And then ultimately, I work with their nervous systems. So that's a very big mouthful. So I'm sorry to lay a lot of words down, but that gives you a lot of room to play with, a lot of context, and we can open up any and all of those subjects.
Awesome, 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 Shade. I love it. It's an interesting topic. Actually, I discovered a lot of new terms and new technology and new terminology in the field of mindset, growth, focus. Thanks to your mentorship, thanks to your help, because you're always bringing new ideas. I feel you're combining different technologies and different concepts together in order to create something that a lot of people can take in a very easy, digestible manner. So that's, I think, is something that is missing currently in the marketplace. But
Mm,
allow me to ask you the following question, Shay, if possible. We spoke a little bit in the past about focus, how to maintain focus. And I think focus is the most important attribute in order to get the job done, especially for
mm.
tech individuals, for entrepreneurs. So, what are some of the techniques that you could share, please, that would allow our audience to stay focused, stay on the job?
100%. And well, first of all, we could talk about the concept. We have presence, so we need presence. And what is presence? Well, we need to wake up to the fact that we actually have a focus, we have an intention, we have an ability to be here now as a present human being. And then we can take that presence and we can turn that into little packets of focus. And well, as you said, like if we're really serious and really honest with ourselves, life is about managing packets of focus in certain sequences. And if we talk about things like entrepreneurialism, or we talk about building systems or building technologies, it's really about how do we organize our packets of focus into systems, into management, into tools, into whatever it is. And if we look at that from a higher level, number one thing I'd say if you want to get good at focus is first of all, fall in love with the idea that you want to become a master of presence and focus. And another word for that is start to choose to be a master. Start to choose at an executive level. I want to master my life, my intentions, my capabilities. Now, that in itself will start to open up a pathway or a rabbit hole of possibilities. And obviously, you need to have that thought on a consistent basis. Like it's not just a one time choice, it's a choice to start to move in that kind of intentional direction. Next thing I'd say is after you do that is you want to then start to look at, well, what can you do to fortify that focus? Good sleep, good food, lots of water, maybe some movement, definitely walking, definitely doing some physical exercise. I'd highly recommend things like breathing exercises. I can give you some examples of that kind of thing. And then if you want to then boil it down into more of the performance mentoring, then it's about creating alignment. And this is where we get into more of the technical high level stuff. I think just quickly, I'll say that a lot of people are able to like feed on a lot of ideas that are generally available in the world, and that's great. But if you really want to be like high performance and you want to save yourself a lot of time and you want to have excellent focus, it's very good to work with somebody, work with a technically capable individual who can help you to align your values, your goals, and your strategies so that you can be much more capable. And off the top of my head, I'll say that a good session with somebody might save them a lifetime of problems that they don't even know they have. So it's an irreplaceable asset to be able to have like the right kinds of sequencing and support around learning how to focus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you, Shay. And I notice this a lot of times. It's it's not only focus, but also if we speak about motivation and inspiration. Sometimes we see a video and we're so inspired. Oh wow, I feel amazing today. I want to do stuff. But the next day it's like, hey, I'm back to being normal again. So do you have a technique, perhaps, Shay, from your experience, from your past sessions, where an individual can stay consistently disciplined and focused throughout a long period of time to accomplish an objective? Is there a way to maintain that fire that we sometimes feel when we see something that inspirational? And could you share some ways of keeping that fire alive in a consistent basis?
Coffee and cigarettes is a common one. No, but aside from that, which I'm sure most people are aware of, caffeine is obviously a great booster that people can use. And honestly, I'm drinking one right now. I would highly recommend you get yourself good
Sorry, brother.
quality green tea, good quality green tea,
Oh
because
yeah.
it doesn't burn you out like coffee. It has a little bit more of a sort of a lean kind of approach to energy. So to answer the question, there's a biological aspect and then there's a psychological aspect. And we also need, maybe there's even a strategic aspect as well. So biologically, yet again, like if I'm tired, if I'm burnt out, if I'm eating junk food, or also if I am overstimulating myself with cigarettes and then I'm like, that's like a bad thing, then I'm not going to have the capability to be as focused if I had more stable physiology. So that might be a
Mhm.
little bit more of a long game, but obviously taking care of the body, taking care of the physiology, and building like a fortified sense of health is going to be a super important thing. Because if I have an anxious state, if I have an underlying sense of hyper vigilance and let's say an activated primal brain because I'm experiencing fear or overwhelm or some kind of disorientation, any higher order thinking, any sequencing of my ability to create is going to be compromised. So that's
Mhm.
the first thing. Now, and on that note, you can learn things, and this is what I teach people all the time. You can learn ways to regulate your nervous system. Like you
Mhm.
can use breathing techniques that they teach in special forces or they teach in yogic ashrams, for example, and you can learn them in minutes. But if you do them consistently, these are tools that will down regulate your nervous system. So, but learning to down regulate and keep that focus is going to be one key thing. The other thing is in having like the type of like positive psychology that really keeps you on track. And yet again, this is also a little bit of a long game. I know a lot of people are often looking for like quick band-aids or magic pills. And
Mm.
there are, like if you want a magic pill, the simple magic pill is think of what you want in a way that motivates you, stick it in front of you, and just keep imagining yourself on the other side of it as if it's already done. That's the
Yeah.
simplest way. But at the same time, we obviously need to come to terms with the fact that there is a certain strategy that needs to be put in place and there is a certain pathway that needs to start to open up to do with that. And that's where we start to look a little bit of the subtlety or the art of focus and strategies of how do we maintain focus. And you need to develop some sense of emotional resilience and intelligence, because if you have a part of yourself that is basically rebelling against the fact that you need to do work for a long period of time, then you're going to be restless, or you're going to sabotage yourself, or you're going to find ways to have dramas, or you're going to attract problem situations to yourself that give you an excuse to divert away from the fundamental focus. And I can say for myself, and this is about learning to be a master. Like if you want to learn to grow through the journey of mastery of yourself or your business or your capabilities to focus, then it's going to be very beneficial over time to learn how to regulate overwhelm and then also to be able to speak to yourself with respect, learn to understand what the inner self needs, learn to understand what your current self is trying to do, work out what your options and your resources are, work out what your goals are. So all of that is like probably sounds a little bit technical, but that's what it really takes to learn to be somebody that can sit down and consistently focus for 8, 10, 15 hours a day. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I notice sometimes also distractions can be a problem, Shay, especially nowadays. We have so many notifications, so many apps. The phone is always there. Even if you're working in a computer environment, there's always emails coming up, notification from different communication apps. So maybe it's also a good idea to understand that confronting these issues and understanding exactly where you want to put your focus is a very, very interesting topic. Sometimes, Shay, when dealing with different individuals, because I have so many friends that I deal with on a daily basis, I feel that we can be a little bit positive and sometimes we can also be a little bit negative. So there is a fight between that inner positivity and that negativity. Can you help our audience, please, Shay, find out, is there a balance, or it's always a good idea to embrace that positivity and stay positive even when you're facing a big issue?
Well, it's a great question. And I mean, ultimately, having like a positive focus, or let's say a towards focus, a focus that's moving towards something that's solution orientated, is going to be more effective than having like a negative focus or an away from focus or a focus of what you don't want or what you're trying to avoid. Because just the same as like we don't drive a car by looking everywhere that we don't want to go. And we certainly don't look in the rear vision mirror and then try to work out where we're going. So that's what a lot of people are doing with their thinking. You know, they're using their point of attention to reverse to be living in the past in a way that's not useful. Or
Mhm.
what can oftentimes happen as well is they're future projecting into scenarios that are uncertain, and they're projecting various forms of catastrophe onto the situation. Now, there's a purpose to that evolutionarily, and we have to keep in mind that as people, as we are social primates, and part of our design is that we are biased towards survival, which means we're biased towards looking for problems because we want to look for where's the problem, where's the predator, where's the issue, how do we fortify and protect ourselves against stuff happening that is potentially going to have a big effect. Now, what we need to recognize as conscious social primates, because we're not simple mammals, we're highly complex mammals and we have a lot of higher order thinking, is that we can start to overrule and let's say train our mind to be better at focusing on what's important and asking better questions. The other thing I would say is like negativity can be an excellent place to start if you're asking the right questions. If you're asking the question of like, what's the problem that I need to capture so that I understand where I need to put my focus so that I can start to ask better questions? Because really what I want to do is get to my outcomes, and I want to be able to be safe, secure, or productive or effective or, high performance or whatever it is you're aiming for. Then you can start to flip things around in terms of like a focus game. So part of it, yet again, is like a simple thing is just be aware of what state you're running. I've already talked about that, the state of your body, the state of your focus. The part of it is going to be like, what story are you running? That's what you're asking now. What's the story you're focusing on? Like if I'm focusing on global politics, if I'm focusing on wars, if I'm focusing on, geological disasters that are outside of my scope, if I'm worried about, the potentials of technology taking over my mind and my life and then leaving me with things that are going to be negative, then I'm actually investing in the future in a timeline that I don't want. I'm actually putting my time and energy in a reality that's not necessarily effective if I'm only doing that. Now, the next point after we have a state and a story is a strategy. So, what are we actually going to do about this? So, the strategy is really like, well, what can I do that's going to be effective? Now, honestly, I'm a pretty melancholic person if you get to know me. So, I tend to always be looking for where's the problem so I can solve it. Now,
Yeah,
that doesn't
yeah,
mean
yeah,
it doesn't mean
yeah.
that I'm like necessarily like a negative person in my character, in the sense that I'm
Mhm.
just looking for what's the things that need to be solved. So another thing that I'll say quickly, because I know I'm pretty verbose here and I'm saying a lot of things, but I want to give a lot of downloads, is that honestly, there's a secret that people need to wake up to, which is that our nervous systems are programmed at a young age, and our negativity biases are often set at those younger ages. And if you have anxiousness about the future, if you have uncertainty or disorganization about who you are in the world because you weren't provided for, or you didn't have a safe sense of security, or you didn't have a sense of ongoing regulation inside of your psychology in a consistent way, then there can be like an ongoing automatic unconscious tendency to be looking for that negativity bias. And one thing I don't want to do as a let's say a coach that has integrity is I don't want to sell people a positivity band-aid that's not true.
Mm,
So I want people to understand that if they have an actual like need for retraining their nervous system, for de-traumatizing their primal brain, for shifting information from their amygdala into more like deeper parts of their brain where it's integrated in, then that will actually have a very big positive effect. And yet again, I work with clients all the time that come to me with, a lifetime of dramas that they don't even consciously know. And with the right questions and the right frames and the right implementations of change work, they can let huge amounts of those layers off that are going to result in them ultimately experiencing a much better baseline of general, what I will call neutral positivity. And the last thing I'll say, because it's a bit of a master thing, is that this is about finding the middle point, because reality is about the truth. Reality is not positive or negative, just the same
Mhm.
as a battery is not positive or negative, or the earth is not positive or negative. We live in a bipolar reality. We live in a dualistic reality. We need to understand that we have multiple dimensions, and a master sits in between, able to fluctuate between higher and lower parts. And as you probably know, if you're honest with yourself, it's the downsides, it's the hard parts, it's the difficult questions, it's the heavy states that sometimes can give us the greatest benefits of breakthroughs, character development, and transformation if we can embrace them as somebody that's a creator, if we can embrace them as somebody that's a forward moving thinker. Now, we could think of that as positive, but it's not necessarily positive. I would say it's more constructive, it's more proactive, it's more creative. And then also, we don't want to get too stuck on the highs either, because otherwise we get a bit crazy and manic, and then the world's all about like too many positives without having an anchored sense of reality. So you want to have a little bit of both.
That's.
Yeah.
I'll try to ask a question despite my voice, and sorry again for that. Very, very interesting, Shae. And I think there is a bit of synchronicity because I started to read books almost a year ago about mindsets, to reread some books and add new books and also intentions. And obviously when you start to do that, you have social media posts that you see and you read and you listen and YouTube options and everything. So intentions is a big thing. Everybody's talking about it. And they are promoting the fact that if you have gratitude, if you have your intentions and all these things, that will happen. So in my case, as I told you, I'm an engineer, so I'm stereotypical in the sense that I'm very Cartesian. But over the years with kids and everything and age, I'm more open to anything, everything, with some judgment call, I hope so. So since July 2024, I started to write my intentions. I read them back, and I do that on 9 days out of 10, depending on different things. And I'm highlighting a few things and I'm doing outlining stuff to make sure I really believe them, as you said. So I don't want to repeat what you well said. Um, One thing I would like you to talk about is intentions, thinking about it, believing it, writing it down, all the things that you mentioned, and actions.
Mm.
Because, and I don't want to give you more than that. I'd like to hear you about intentions and real actions of that person that does that. For me, as you probably very well know, even if you don't know me personally, you know engineers, and I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm an action guy. So anyways, I'm going to stop there and let you talk about your real opinion.
I love that, Steve. Thank you. It's a great opening. So, uh, there's a couple of ways to frame this, and just to say, to reinforce what you're saying, a lot of people get attracted to the idea that they can create their reality with their mind, that they have this idea that somehow that they can just like say what they want and it's going to happen. Now, there is somewhat of a truth to that in the sense that we can have an ability to interact with our world with words, with symbols, with models, and ultimately we don't actually have to believe in fairies and crystals for that to be true. Like, if we're honest with ourselves, the English language or any language is a symbol system which spells words, and those words represent ideas. Those ideas are programming code for consciousness, which are memes. So a letter A, for example, if we really look at what's behind a letter A, there's a whole world of history and ideas, and how many ways and places has an A been used, and maybe infinite forms or contexts that an A has been used. So if we really sort of trip into that a little bit, we start to see, well, language is code. We speak our existence. We speak ourselves into existence, or we speak our frames of reality into existence, is probably a more accurate way to put it. Now, with that being said, we also need to then come to terms with Language exists inside of the context of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness is the foundation of our real existence. And as time goes on, which we are getting more comfortable with, consciousness is being increasingly understood as a fundamental substance or a fundamental foundation of our existence. And we will, and I think we already are at a point at which cutting edge science is starting to really ask the question of, is existence actually living? Are we in a living universe of intentionally, communicative parts, which, if we're honest with ourselves, we see that in nature all the time. You go into a forest, there's mycelium under the surface, there's mushrooms contacting things, there's trees are contacting each other, the insects, like everything is this beautiful ecosystem of communications, chemical, biochemical, electrochemical, sound, sight, light, every angle, every possibility, every dimension of what that material reality is doing is interconnecting into this physical kind of matrix, if you will, of an ecosystem. So once again, as humans, we are born out of that. We are that. We're a natural system, and we come out of this. We're biological, and we have all these different orders of things inside of us. So what that means is that our fundamental nature is a conscious nature, and we have the ability to communicate with other things all the time with our intentionality. Now, let's break down intentionality a little bit. So intention. So if we think about the word, it's having intention. We're living in tension with something. And if we also step back from that a little bit, we look at like, well, what is a tension? Well, a tension is neutral tension, which we haven't chosen to put something onto yet, or it's uh, a unit. Let's say, a tension is a some kind of package of focus that we have. Now, if we put attention into intention, then we can start to move things in a vector. So this is where we can also use, which I like to update a lot of this language from fluffy kind of new agey language into more practical language for engineers or for technical people, which is like we're dealing with a form of spiritual physics. We're dealing with the fact you have a present state, you have a projected future reality, which is a desired state, and you're creating a point A and a point B. And when you create a point A and a point B, you start to set up what's called a structural tension. Now, structural tension is a vibration of intentionality of between where you are and where you want to be. And if you hold an outcome, if you hold an end state, like when you step in a car and you want to go to a destination, the first thing you ask yourself when you step in a taxi, for example, or you go for a holiday is, where do I want to go? What's my end state? And you have to have a sense of what that is. Now, generally, we don't have to always think about what our end state is, but as we are the driver, for example, we do have to have some sense of like, I'm going to this place. And even though I'm driving right and left or I'm avoiding obstacles, I'm ultimately in a vector. I'm going down this conduit of my intention to be able to get to my place. So this is the same kind of metaphor as life in general. So when we set up a container or a context of directing our attention towards an intention, then we start to create those packets of focus we were talking about before. Now, as you mentioned, to fortify what you were saying, Steve, is that when we use things like gratitude or appreciation or love as part of our focus, we start to create like a more integrative, like higher sense of being. And that is usually a positive sense of being, which then gives us more of a feeling of wholeness and positivity. And in many ways, it can be quite relieving to our oftentimes very neurotic conditioned mind, which is sometimes compartmentalizing things into fears and doubts or concerns or complexities. So we can counterbalance some of our neurotic tendencies or our nervous tendencies or our fear-based tendencies with things like love and appreciation and gratitude, because it's changing focus. It's setting intentions that are starting to create positive feedback loops or more integrative like understandings of how we feel and how we operate in the world. Now, last thing I'll say, which is a neat little package, is that if you start to break it down as if what you think does have an effect on what you create, and that becomes even more powerful when you realize that what you think is not just on a conscious level, it's at a subconscious level. So we also need to open up to this deeper paradigm that we're not just a chatterbox conscious mind that's thinking about what we want for dinner. We're also a whole data bank of things that we've been carrying for, a long time, or we collect all the time. We have 40,000 plus pieces of information coming into our nervous system every second, and that's being processed by the deeper mind. It's being processed by the primal mind, by the reptilian mind, by the deeper mammalian mind. And that's the subconscious process. And even if we go deeper into that, it goes into these unconscious processes that are like part of like the core of our deeper nervous system. Now, why is that important? Because that's the stuff that's really programming how we're showing up in the present moment. And once again, people don't often see that because they're living in the symptom of the reaction to the previous condition, to the previous database. And that database might have been created yesterday or last week, or most probably it was created 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. And it's still having ripple effects because of belief sets. And what are belief sets? We have an experience. We put a belief on top of something because we say this experience was good, this experience was bad, I am this or I am that. And therefore, that belief set acts like similar to what you have in an AI, for example. It becomes like a frame, it becomes an instructional frame that is then operating on a continuous basis to filter information and sort information according to the context of that particular belief set. Now, that's really important when it comes to what we're doing with our reality. If you want to create your reality, then having frames and beliefs that focus you and put you in a direction you really want to go is obviously going to be much better than having beliefs that are not taking you where you want to go. But where that gets tricky is we have unconscious things that are happening inside of us from early childhood, etc., and we might not have even looked at them or reviewed them for a lifetime. We might not even know they exist. So becoming conscious they exist and challenging them. And also, as you said, Steve, reading good stuff, feeding new input in, writing things down, thinking about stuff, even catch your negative thoughts, write them on a piece of paper and stick them on your fridge. So you see, I'm not that guy. I don't do that. So, and it's the same thing. Like if you know what mind control is, you can't be mind controlled. If you know what propaganda is, you see it, you're like, that's propaganda. And I'm not going to believe that because you understand that it's something you can protect yourself against. So that's the first thing is what you think you create. The next thing is what you feel you attract. Well, that's about getting deeper into the body because what we think and what we feel are often very connected together. And super important fact that we often don't pay attention to is that it's not just about what we say, it's about what we feel about what we say. Because if I say, I really want to be a winner, but really my body's like, and it feels bad because there's some negative dopamine response or something that makes me feel like I'm not good enough, then that's not going to be cool. But at the same time, as we just said before, if I drink a green tea and I feel good and I'm hanging out with my bros or whatever, and I'm like, my energy's good, I'm like, I have good feelings. So then my words and my feelings start to have more of a positive synergy. And this is also what we talked about with starting to create foundations of focus of positive feelings so that we can have more of an ability to create enchantment in the world. That's a pretty magical word, but we can start to create power by using our words and our feelings together in this kind of synergy. And one of the ways we do that, which is the next part, is so we have what we think we create, what we feel we attract, and the next thing is what we imagine we tend to become. So when we imagine that we're going to become more masterful, when we imagine that we're going to be a good communicator, when we imagine that we're going to become a successful entrepreneur, when we imagine that we're going to have a successful project, or we're going to make sales, or we're going to finish a project, it's going to put us on a track. It's going to put us on a vector where we have more of a tendency to do that if we can get the thoughts and the feelings and the imagination all together in some kind of synergy. And then the last piece is what you practice, you become good at. So what you could say what you fake it till you make it. I don't like that statement. I like we practice, we become good at what we practice. So so the last thing is what we think we create, what we feel we attract, and what we imagine we become, and then what we practice we get good at. So that's what you said about the intention, and oftentimes that gets missed because people who want to avoid responsibilities. They want to avoid growing up. They want to avoid developing capabilities because they have some void or some difficulty in their personality to fulfill some kind of capability. Will use a type of bypass and just sit and meditate or use mantras or positive affirmations or read a lot of self-help books or watch a million hours of YouTube videos to avoid the fact that they just need to take some action. But taking action is also very important in that process. When we start to take action, go back and start to develop the feedback loop of the positive mindsets as well. So action is a very important way to ground your metaphysics into reality. because we also have to recognize we're going through a process of materialization. And on the higher level, we have metaphysical ideation, and then somehow we symbolize it, we formulate it, we manage it, and at some point it starts to switch into actual physical ideation, physicalization, and that means manifestation. So at the point at which we act, we start to see what's actually real. We reality test. And then as we reality test, we get feedback, and that improves more and more, and then we can find out what's really going on. And now some people just say, just take a lot of action and find out, like this call it fuck around and find out. Or you have another one, which is more like, what can we do with this other, internal work that's more about, just focusing on the mindset. Now, to take a little bit of a metaphysical angle, all is mind. That's a good paradigm to think about. And on the feminine side, the passive side, the yin side, we use the void of our mind, the emptiness of our consciousness, to be able to put intentions into that place so that we can attract things to ourselves like a magnet. That's the feminine power. But then we can take intention, we can take action, we can direct our skill, our physicalization, our architecture. We can build stuff with our action, and that's the yang. That's the masculine. That's the active principle. So reality is both. It's always both. So yeah.
There's something that it was for me. I think it was last year. I read the book when I was 20-some years old during my first degree university, and I shared the book to other people. They didn't read it. I got it back. I put it in my shelf, and last year I just put it out, and I started to read it again. And that book was about psychology for sports people. So basically, the psychology of sports and how you should approach things, commit yourself, make sure you do your work on your improvements and all these things. I won't do a summary of it, but I was reading it for a second time last year or 2 years ago. Said, "Holy shit, that's me." That's exactly who I am today, like most of it, without any pretension, but everything I read it very carefully. And example, if you have something I commit to myself, I'm confident enough to say, okay, it's my fault and I accept it and I want to learn from it and so on and so on. So I said, that's basically, I wanted to be that type of person. And I became like a big part of what the suggestions were in that book. So it was for me, oh, okay, maybe it was during 20-some years, but I didn't think about it. I just read it once and maybe go back and there was a drawing. So for me, the pictures they stay in my mind and I look at them and I was seeing the thing. So that's very, very powerful to have something in mind. And I have other things as well that maybe it's for later. One thing that in a more recent book, there was a formula, kind of a formula to keep it simple. It's not a mathematical formula, obviously, but it's intentions brings thoughts. The thoughts are bringing feelings. Feelings are bringing actions. And that thing brings results. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that, Shae? And Mo, if you want, obviously.
Be good to hear a bit about Mo. I'll just quickly say a little bit about what you're saying. Is like, I think these models and these formulas that give us a way to let's say contemplate and make sense of this paradigm of intention and manifestation, let's say, is a very useful thing to look at. And I think sometimes it's hard to say whether it's the thoughts comes first or the feelings comes first, but thoughts and feelings tend to co-arise. And there's usually like there's a duality to those two things as well. But and I would see them yet again, kind of like a day and a night, like they're kind of happening as a duality.
I think that if I can explain this one from my point of view is why feelings before actions, because people have many ways or many thinking or say, I want to be this. I'm thinking about I want to be this, but having the feeling of being that person is probably getting more actions. But you're right, they are mixing. That could be why they put feelings in front of actions, in my understanding, Shae.
Yes. And I think it's good, man. Once again, if we want to lay a formula, because you're putting out some really good formulas, and it's okay. I like to share a few of these pieces of gold.
Let's go. Let's go.
Pretty amazing. And this is really hard-won stuff, to be honest. This is things that took me years, honestly, to put together, and also I've received from other people and worked together in developing, etc. And I know this stuff works. So the first thing is you have to set some kind of outcome, which obviously is a thought. But then as we set the thought, Looks like we lost Steve for a second here. We'll see if
Oh,
he's
we
coming
lost
back.
Steve. Let's give him a minute.
Okay.
That's okay. He's back. It's all right. We're just
Oh,
experiencing the matrix is glitching now.
the
So
Matrix.
it's all right. But when you start firing on all cylinders, literally reality
I
starts
saw
bending.
Keanu Reeves in the process, by the way. He was doing something with the Matrix.
Awesome. You just stepped out to kind of do your little thing. So uh, so just to finish a little bit of a formula here, because I think it's good. So we start with intent, outcome. What do I want? Write it down. Vision. That's a mental process. Then feeling. You know, what's it like when I close my eyes and I feel it? I vision it, I feel it, and then I'm starting to get into the why I want this. Like, what does it feel like? What's the outcome? Then I can start to look at, like, well, what are the next steps? What's the questions I need to ask? And really, if we're honest with ourselves, when we vision and we feel things and we start asking questions, we have to solve stuff. We have to sequence things. We have to find resources. We have to use frameworks. We have to take actions. And that becomes the last step. Is like, so I think, I feel, I act. And that's what you're saying, I think is true. And to put another model around this, because once again, this is magic. We're talking magic. This is not stage magic pulling rabbits out to hats. This is real magic. This is human intention, consciousness to be able to literally manipulate the world. And if we're honest with ourselves, all of this stuff, these phones, all of this cool tech that we have around us, all these cool cups and whatever it is we have, it's all magic. I mean, this is all intentions that started in people's minds, and yeah, it's a big thing. So think thoughts start as a vision. Vision is our imaginary capacity. And as has been said by many great teachers, our ability to imagine is maybe our greatest superpower, because it's the gift that humans have that makes us in some sense superior to the other life forms on the planet that don't have the ability to have this intentional visionary kind of imagination. Next is embody. Like we said, we have to get into the feeling, into the knowing, into the sense, and we need to embody our sense. This is also why being grounded, we hear these sort of hippie terms, being grounded, being embodied, being present, being aware, being mindful, is all very important, because we need to put the mind into the body. And one esoteric secret I'll teach you is, like, the consciousness of our enlightenment doesn't exist as a cloud. It is us. It's literally the body is the vehicle and the transmission and the tool of being able to experience it directly. So it's better to get into the body and experience the body as the receiver and as the grounding post. It's like literally the antenna of what we're experiencing. And if we can be in the body rather than trying to escape it, then that actually makes us much more enlightened, much more powerful, much faster. So we want to use the body, we want to use our grounding, we want to use our humanized sort of ability to embody. And then the last step, which is just to reinforce, is action. Embodiment in action, putting it into the world. And what's that called? It's initiation. Now we're moving into initiating a new reality, a new experience, a new potential. And if I'm doing a project or you're doing a project, if we're honest with ourselves, we're moving from thoughts to embodiment to testing to action to feedback, like, constantly. We might be doing that 100 times a day, 500 times a day, maybe even 1,000 times a day, depending on what we're working on. Yeah, something to think about.
Yeah,
What do you
no. It's
what do you think, Mo? And I also want to hear what you got to say, Steve.
And for me, I believe we are on it to 100%. I agree with you 100%, because so many times we start thinking about some impractical, methodologies that we are implementing in our life, and we forget about the physical part of it, the embodiment part of it, the mindset, the combination of all the things. So many times when I'm presenting something, or when I'm doing a training, I feel I'm in the flow state. I feel like it's natural. I don't even think about it. It's just like it, and it's so beautiful, so interesting. But when I am tense, when I am not in my element, I have to think about it. I have to have notes. I have to do a lot of things. So obviously I prepare, but I believe the flow state, if we can figure out a way to show people how to reach that flow state every single time, athletes, they say it, speakers, they say it, doctors, everybody in any field, any high performance individual in the marketplace nowadays, they say that when they are in the flow state, they just feel a happiness, a perfectionism in what they're doing, and they just get it done in a very beautiful way. And that's something, Shae, that I would love to perhaps we first start with Steve. I think you wanted to say something, then maybe the follow-up question would be, do you have some techniques, Shae, where people can get into the flow stage more often? Because your brother is struggling, man. I want to get it every time.